Hi everyone, welcome to this video on lesson 15 of the Human Body Part 2 scheme of work. This lesson is about insulin and blood glucose, and really I think it's a really lovely lesson to teach because you can actually teach everything that students need to know through to concrete examples. And yeah, I'm going to show you how I did this with a class at Orchard Park. Actually, only yesterday I did this, so this is very much fresh in my mind. So the first example that I went through with the students I was working with yesterday was how insulin helps maintain our blood glucose level if it gets too high. And it's worth just referring back or reminding students of the kind of schema that we introduced them to in the lesson on reflex arcs. This idea that we start with a stimulus, which is a change in the environment. A signal is sent to our central nervous system that then coordinates some sort of response. And lots of the responses that we're studying in this unit are kind of reflex, unconscious responses. We don't think about this just happens. So this is a really lovely example, and you can give, it's a nice topic because you can relate it to lots of very concrete things that students will be interested in. So this is an example. A person eats a bar of chocolate. So what I'm going to show first is that if you were to zoom in on one of their blood vessels, and I've just drawn it like that. I mean, it's maybe not the perfect diagram, but hopefully it's relatively straightforward. The reason I've done the zoom in, as I always say, is to move from concrete to abstract. So something really concrete, like eating some chocolate, something many of them will do every day. Zooming in on that, let's think about this in very abstract terms. What that means is you've got a high blood glucose concentration. So there's lots and lots of glucose molecules now in your bloodstream. What happens next? Well, this is detected by the pancreas, which triggers a response. So if we look at the response here, pancreas, as a consequence of the blood glucose concentration being high, and I've put that as number 1, the pancreas releases insulin. So I've labelled this with capital I's. I'm not sure, you may wish to do that in another way. But what we said before in a previous lesson was, some responses are carried out by muscles. They're one class of effectors. Others are carried out by glands, and the pancreas is a gland which releases this hormone insulin. So what does the insulin do? So the insulin floods into the bloodstream, and what that does is converts glucose in the bloodstream to glycogen, which is then stored in the liver. So I'm just showing that I think the main point that I was emphasizing yesterday is when the insulin enters the bloodstream, what that does is causes glucose to exit the bloodstream. And the fact that it goes to the liver and stored as glycogen, that's kind of secondary. But the main thing that they need to recognize, that is important, but the main thing they need to recognize is that if insulin has caused glucose to exit the bloodstream, then the blood glucose concentration decreases and we're back to a normal blood glucose concentration. Now, it's worth just showing here, before I move on to the second example, how would I then model that? So with the group yesterday, I then modeled how I would turn those diagrams, and actually it would have been helpful to do this right underneath so they could see it all on the visualizer. But how can we turn those diagrams that we've just drawn into words? How can we turn it into a full paragraph? Because that's what diagrams are doing. Those diagrams are scaffolding student thinking to support them in writing really fluently in that logical order and using all of the correct keywords. So essentially what I'm doing, and there's a question in the slides which I've taken this from, but I'm explaining how, after eating a chocolate bar, the pancreas helps your blood glucose concentration return to normal. So firstly, I need to identify the overall cause and effect. In this case, it's eating a chocolate bar is the overall cause. That's the first thing that happens. The fact that the blood glucose concentration returns to normal, that is the overall effect. And then I'm literally just telling the story that I told with the pictures, but what I want is for students to turn those pictures into these words. And this is where I'm modeling all of the things that we've done in different CPD sessions about if and then. Consequently, as a result, this means that all of those causal linking words that we use when explaining things. But hopefully what you can see is just how closely this text here maps onto the diagram that I drew previously. So then the other example that I want students to look at, this is the one we just looked at here, which is when blood glucose concentration is too high. I also want to look at what happens when blood glucose concentration is too low. So I'm going to just cover that one up so it's not too much of a distraction. So let's move down here. So yes, this is another example, and again, it's a great one to relate to students' experience because they will all have played sport at some point and run around, and you can tell them that what happens during that, and it's a lovely way to link it back to these even bigger ideas about respiration and the circulatory system and so on. But we can say, okay, if you're doing exercise, well, your muscles need to respire more, link it back to that prior knowledge. What's going to happen is, because the muscles are taking all the glucose they can out of your bloodstream, there's a danger that you end up with a low blood glucose concentration. And in fact, your blood glucose concentration will fall quite quickly if you're exercising. So how does the body respond? Well, in this case, it's kind of the opposite to what we saw before. Again, that stimulus is detected by the pancreas, and that triggers the response. And essentially, what happens is the pancreas releases glucagon into the bloodstream, and glucagon does the exact opposite to what we saw before. So in this case, whereas before the insulin caused glucose to exit the bloodstream, glucagon does the opposite thing. It causes glycogen in the liver to be converted back to glucose. That goes into the bloodstream, and therefore you end up with a restored blood glucose concentration at the normal level. And again, I've labeled this as 1, 2, 3, 4 to support students with writing. But these really simple diagrams hopefully just give students a sense of how it is that that the body responds to those changes in blood glucose, automatically responds to always bring it back to normal. And that's the big idea that we want to get across in this mini sequence of lessons at the end of the Human Body Part 2 scheme. Final thing to say is, in the next lesson, which will be the final lesson of the scheme, we look at insulin and blood glucose again, but now we look at when it doesn't quite function as it's supposed to in the case of diabetes. So that will be the subject of the next video.